Good evening, and welcome to this term's seminar series hosted by the Oxford Programme for Cyber and Tech Policy. Our mission at OXTTP and at the Blavatnik School more broadly is to harness technology for the public good. This commitment is reflected in our efforts to unlock innovation through AI security, ensure technology advances access to justice, and through many other research initiatives at the school. Now, 12 hours ago, I wasn't entirely sure that I was going to be standing here with you tonight. I was in hospital, spending many hours with ChatGPT, I call mine Jeeves, to parse through medical data and make informed decisions for my family. And so whilst our focus tonight is on AI and the future of national security, which so often focuses on the risks of AI as well as the benefits, it also feels right to acknowledge the profound ways in which these technologies already shape the ways in which we perceive and interact with the world. Now, Katrina Mulligan understands that better than anyone in this room. Working at the intersection of technology, policy, and national security, she has been committed throughout her career in government, in the public sector, and in the private sector to ensuring that powerful AI technologies benefit humanity. As head of national security partnerships at OpenAI, Katrina leads work with US government partners, helping leaders understand and apply emerging AI capabilities to mission-critical challenges. Before joining OpenAI, Katrina held senior roles across government and the nonprofit sector, including at the White House, the Pentagon, the Department of Justice, and the US intelligence community, where she managed the White House response to the Snowden disclosure, supported counterterrorism efforts, and oversaw special operations policy. Katrina, we are absolutely delighted to have you here with us tonight. I also want to take a minute to thank Professor Roxana Radu, our academic director, for stepping in at the last minute to help steer this conversation. ChatGPT can undoubtedly do many things, but it is no substitute for a colleague who generously lends a hand in a time of need. And so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Katrina to the floor.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for having me. I'm really excited to be here. So just to start, I'm going to give some brief remarks and set the scene for what I hope will be a lively discussion after. And I'm going to make four kind of bold claims. The first one is that I am a very strange messenger on AI, and I'll get into why that is. And it should give all of you a little bit of a seed of doubt about how much you should take from me as your messenger. The second is that everything you know about AI is already out of date. And we'll talk about why that is and what some of the myths are that are already becoming untrue, things that used to be true about AI that are becoming untrue at a really rapid pace. The third claim I'll make is that the world is looking at a calendar right now, and frontier AI labs, AI companies are looking at a watch. The way that we are thinking about time is in a really different measurement than what has historically been true, and that has implications for policy, public policy in particular. And my fourth claim is going to be that I am really worried that the Western world is actually going to win the race to AGI, whatever that means, and still lose on competition with China. And I'll talk about how that could happen and what some of the dimensions are that are at play. So to go back to the beginning, I am a very strange messenger on AI. And to start with, to understand that, I think it's helpful to know a little bit more about me than just my professional background. I am an old lady who likes birds, literally, I have gotten to the age where the fact that there's a woodpecker that lives in my yard and frequents my garden is very exciting news for me. And I am, without a doubt, one of the oldest people at every single meeting that I'm at OpenAI. And that was after having a very lengthy career where quite the opposite was true. I was frequently in rooms, probably not dissimilar to Roxana, where I was one of the youngest people in all of the Pentagon and Situation Room and White House meetings that I was a part of. And it's been really a surprise. I had, fun fact, never sent an emoji in a work communication prior to joining OpenAI. And I had also never worked on a MacBook. And so for those of you who've ever made that switch, all of the keyboard shortcuts are different. It's extremely frustrating. And it was just one of a million little ways in which the culture that I came from and the culture that I came to were really, really different from one another. And so it's, in short, not obvious that I would be here at Oxford delivering cutting-edge insights about AI in the year of our Lord 2025, but here I am, so I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope that it's entertaining. But the truth about me is that I'm much more of a national security expert than I am an AI expert, although having been at OpenAI now for almost 2 years, it is also true that I've been at OpenAI for longer than 3/4 of our employees. 3/4. And I'm considered OG in the environment in which I now work, even though to me, being somewhere for less than 2 years is not a lengthy tenure. But that's how fast things are changing. But to go back a little further in sort of my background, I was Barack Obama's paralegal before he ran for Senate. I bought the domain name barackobama.com for like $15 on GoDaddy, like back in the early aughts. I was his the first hire for his Senate campaign. I was one of the earliest hires for the presidential campaign. And then I did a thing that nobody really who works on political campaigns typically does. I decided I did not want to be a political employee, and I became a career civil servant in the U.S. government. And I went down into the bowels of the U.S. intelligence community, where there really aren't many political appointees. There's only a small handful, and they're all concentrated at the very, very top of the system. And I spent over a decade, actually significant, more like 15 years, as serving in various career capacities over multiple professional or presidential administrations of different political parties. And so, you know, ODNI, the Office of Director of National Intelligence, Counterterrorism, the White House, the Snowden disclosures, a question that one might ask about my background is, then why go to an AI company? Why OpenAI? Why now? And the answer is that is twofold. One is that the through line in my professional career is that was actually something that I learned while I was working on the Snowden disclosures. It was a time in my career where I was really quite early in my journey. I mean, I was, I guess, technically mid-career, but I feel like I was on the earlier side of that. And I was someone who believed very deeply in the patriotism of supporting national security efforts, and was really not very skeptical of what it was that we were doing as a country, or what tactics or TTPs, methods that we were using to collect the information that we all believed was necessary to keep us safe. And I came out of the experience having to really carry the water of the decisions that the intelligence community had made with a much more, I would say, nuanced view of how throughout all of human history, large groups of really well-intentioned people make bad decisions. And that's true in US history, it's true in global history, it's probably true in some of the countries that you all are from and will go back to after your time here at Oxford. And one of the things that I have spent the majority now of my career doing is thinking really hard about that problem and how you avoid it. And it's exactly the kind of problem that we are going to encounter as we proceed on AI in very rapid form and in very kind of uncertain circumstances. It is entirely possible that I will confront some of the same issues at OpenAI that I confronted when I was in the US government, where really large groups of really well-intentioned people who are genuinely trying to do the right thing may not get it all right. And having people who have lived through that and have that kind of skepticism and a little bit of muscle memory about how you ask those questions is really, really important. I became convinced that the most important national security decisions of this decade, of the remainder of this decade, are going to be made at not just companies like mine, although I think that's also true, but at my company. And that's what brought me to OpenAI. Somewhat annoyingly, OpenAI is the only private sector company I have ever interviewed to work at. I got the job and I started, as I said, almost 2 years ago. A little bit of background of what I've done at OpenAI and how it's changed. Almost nobody who works at OpenAI and has been there for more than a year is doing the exact same thing they were doing when they started, because it's a very fluid environment. I started as the first and only person in the company that really had deep national security expertise. And I originally started to think about policy issues. And I helped build the framework that we now use to evaluate when and under what circumstances we will allow our technology to be used for by defense and intelligence agencies for national security purposes. Needless to say, it's a fairly small group of countries that we're willing to work with, and it's a very small set of use cases that we're comfortable working on in the near term, although it's as the technology gets more reliable and capable at certain things, I expect that will change. I also was the lead for forging a partnership with the U.S. national labs, Los Alamos, Sandia, and Livermore, for those of you who are familiar, to deploy our model weights for the first time ever inside of a U.S. government-owned supercomputer at Los Alamos. That is the first time that our models have been made available inside classified environments and for secure classified government research. And now I am head of national security partnerships at OpenAI. So I've actually moved over from the policy side of our organization into the side that's getting this technology in the hands of government users. And the reason I made that change, if you had told me a year ago that I would move from policy over to the business unit, I would have told you were crazy. But the reason that I did is because I became really convinced of something that I didn't believe to be true before. I used to think, because I'm a policy person in my soul, that there was no problem that a really brilliant policy conversation couldn't solve. And that's what many of you probably can relate to. And I spent over a year having what I thought were really brilliant policy discussions about AI, and they were not working. It was not moving the needle. And I became convinced of something I say to government users all the time. You don't get fit by reading about working out, and you do not get good at understanding the moment that we're in technologically if you are not using this technology on a regular basis. And so I realized that if that's what I actually have a conviction about, that I needed to move over and be one of the people that helps get that technology in the hands of government users. So I'm an old dog, and I'm in the process of learning some new tricks. So I also told you that everything you know about AI is already out of date, and that's kind of a bold claim. But let me give you a few proof points to underscore what I mean. I spend all day, every day thinking about AI, and it turns out that even that doesn't feel like enough to keep up with the pace of technological advancement. So what hope do the rest of you have if you have things that you do that don't involve you thinking about AI all day, every day? It's really hard to keep up with. So the key, I think, is remaining open, more open than we as humans typically are, to receiving new information and allowing it to update our worldview, which is not something I think any of us are particularly good at as a human species. But it's especially open about this because things that were once untrue or were once true about AI are becoming untrue at a dizzying pace. And here's just a few examples. One is it's not that good. I hear that all the time. And especially from government. It is not reliable enough, it isn't that good, I've tried it, and usually when I ask people, when did you try it, they're like, a year and a half ago. And when I first logged into ChatGPT, probably like many of you, it was back when we released 3.5 in 2022. And it really wasn't that good. I describe it as junior high school level outputs. It was gonna be very useful in helping you find a chili recipe if you needed one, but it was not gonna change the world. And, it couldn't pass college entrance exams. It failed the US bar exam. It was impressive from a technological perspective, but it was not life-changing. But then something happened. ChatGPT reached 1 million users in its first 5 days. It reached 100 million users in its first 2 months. It is the absolute fastest adoption of any consumer technology in human history. So to give you a comparison, it took TikTok 9 months to reach 100 million users, and we did it 4 times faster than them. And it took, with major technologies from the past, electricity, telephones, the internet, took decades to reach mass adoption. The internet took 7 years to reach 100 million users. Smartphones took around 4 years. ChatGPT took 2 months. 2 months. It's the steepest adoption curve of technology in human history. And so when you, and again, as I sort of said, that all happened when the technology wasn't really that good. So 100 million people, 2 months after it was launched, got exposed to it when it was meh. And within a year, we released an update to ChatGPT 4, and then we released 4.0, and now we've released 3 reasoning models and ChatGPT 5. And I'll talk a little bit about what those differences are in a minute. But we have gone from, in the span of 2 years, just about maybe 3 years, almost 3 years now, we have gone from junior high school level outputs to exceeding the performance of human PhDs in just about every subject. We have saturated every benchmark that exists for measuring the capability of these technologies. We have ranked #1 in the world in coding without any specialized training. And we are having to create new methodologies for evaluating the capabilities of these models because we've saturated all the known benchmarks pretty much that exist. And that's just remarkable in this time span that we're talking about, in the span of 3 years. So today we have about 800 million weekly active users, and that is, for those of you keeping track, 10% of the planet that's using our technology every single week. Another fun fact, we own about 84% market share at OpenAI, so 84% of the world's population that is using this technology every week is using ChatGPT. Anybody want to take a guess on who's #2? Gemini, Anthropic? Nope. DeepSeek. DeepSeek is #2. Everybody else in the world, Anthropic, Gemini, you name it, Llama, they're all competing for about less than 6% of global market share. Fascinating. Another thing I hear is that it's a black box, and that was once true, that you would never be able to really unpack how the model arrived at its conclusions, what information it considered, and that made it inherently unreliable for doing sensitive work. No longer true. What changed is roughly a year ago now, we released our first reasoning model. OpenAI was the first to do that. For those of you who aren't steeped in this, what's really different about the reasoning paradigm from the original chat paradigm is that it used to be that with chat, you would write a prompt, and ChatGPT would immediately respond. And much like a human, the very first thing that comes to your mind when you're asked a hard question isn't always your best work. And so what we did is we figured out how to teach the model how to pause and think before it responded. And we trained it on how to apply frameworks, how to reverse course, how to figure out that maybe a pathway it was pursuing was not going to be fruitful and try something else. And it turns out that when you give the model longer to think, you get dramatically better outputs with dramatically lower hallucination rates and greater reliability. And we have a lot of data that proves that. But what was interesting about interesting is too simple of a word. What was transformational about the reasoning paradigm is that we opened up a new scaling curve. Prior to reasoning, the scaling curve, the scaling laws were more data, more compute, better outcomes. And you had to basically 10x the amount of data and compute to get this measurably better performance from models. And as many of you may be aware, we were sort of running out of data and compute in the world globally. And so there was this question, markets started reacting like, is this an unsustainable business model? Can we still get better performance out of these models given that we're running out of data and compute? And the answer is, we figured out how to do that by opening up a new scaling curve. And that scaling curve was the amount of time we gave the model to think. And it turns out there's a lot of ability to give the model more time to think, especially when the problems that you want to answer are really hard problems, the cure for cancer, how to advance the future of science. And so we are still seeing, over a year into this new paradigm, really, really impressive results with applying the scaling, the reasoning paradigm and the scaling that comes from adding more time. I guess there are many other things that were once true about AI and are no longer true. Oh, I've missed a part that I should mention. Also really important about the reasoning paradigm is that the model doesn't just think longer, it can produce a detailed chain of thought that tells you exactly what it thought about, what information it relied upon. It can create links inside the chain of thought that show you exactly the underlying information that it was building upon. And the ability of the model to really tell you how it arrived at its conclusion is pretty game-changing for a lot of national security applications, because many of those really require, they're no-fail missions, they require discoverability, and the ability to understand what information was relied upon before arriving at a decision. And I think that the reasoning paradigm has really opened up a lot of opportunities in the space that are not yet fully being harnessed. So there are many other things. Once true about AI, no longer true, but I want to footstop one, and it's that it's too risky to use this technology. It's safer to just keep doing things the way that we've always been doing them. And I, as an old lady who likes birds, am very sympathetic to this argument. It is deeply uncomfortable to be at this moment where everything is moving so fast, and we, as humans, haven't yet really, and certainly as a policymaking community, really haven't wrapped our heads around what it all means and what we should do about it. But it is not safer or more comfortable to keep doing things the way that we've always been doing them in this space. From a national security perspective, if we do that and our adversaries adapt to this technology more quickly than we do, we will not be safer. There is more risk than we realize, and it's very easy to miss quantifying the risk that we take by doing things the way that we've always been doing them. It's always easier to think about the risk that we take by trying something new. If you don't believe me, take a look at the amount of investment the Chinese government and the military in particular is investing in this technology, because that is a really good counterpoint to let's just stay the course. Okay, so I talked a little bit about this. I won't belabor it. The world is looking at a calendar and OpenAI is looking at a watch. I talked about how long it has taken to achieve sort of shocking levels of adoption. We talked about the telephones, electricity, and the internet took decades. Internet took 7 years. Smartphones took 4 years. ChatGPT took 2 months to reach 100 million weekly active users. And I think the thing that I most want to stress is that we're not using the full measure of what these technologies are capable of today. Most people, especially if you're over 40, you're using ChatGPT as a replacement for search, if you're using it at all. You're asking it a question, it's giving you an answer. Sometimes you ask a follow-up question. People under 30 are not using it that way. They're using it as an operating system for their entire life. And it's really sort of fascinating, especially in government and in policy environments where you have typically older populations, a little bit more, mid-career. You really can see the difference when you're in a place like Oxford at a college or university where you have a mixture of old and young, because the way that we're using this technology differs pretty radically. But let me tell you a little bit about what I think the future is going to look like in this space. One is we're going to advance the future of science. We are probably going to see an acceleration of scientific discovery that will hopefully start with the national labs and scientists who are being, getting access to this technology in new and different ways. But I really think that is the place where I'm the most hopeful about what the future holds. Giving patients individualized health information. We have a lot of great examples of that. My team is working on a project specifically with ARPA-H, which is an organization, it's a DARPA-like organization that works inside the Department of Health and Human Services in the United States. And we're really aiming to tackle pediatric brain cancer, which is a problem set that is extremely multimodal. The data sets span all different types of data, and our ability to leverage these models to make better sense of that data and make it more available to practitioners is something that I'm really bullish on. I think we are going to be able to have some transformational effects. We're also going to see a lot more integration with different applications that people already use, and with the ability to work side by side with your peers as you work with AI. So instead of having AI be a one-on-one situation, you're going to have the ability probably within the next year to collaborate on projects that from a business and sort of policy perspective are going to be potentially transformational and having wholes that are bigger than the sum of the parts. But we are going to have to, as policy community, start thinking about the role of time differently. Like, I come from a tradition where, a good policy problem takes a year to 2 to solve. And we don't have a year or 2. This is moving so much faster than that. And so we need to start thinking about time differently. At OpenAI, I think about time in weeks. I don't think about it in months or years. We measure time. We do our planning cycles around weeks, sets of weeks, not months and years. And that's a really different approach that I think government and policy institutions might benefit from learning from. And then the last kind of bold claim that I'll make, and then we can have more of a conversation, is about the Western world and competition with China. It's been about 9 months since I first saw this data. Subsequent to seeing it, I've seen multiple new sets of data about global attitudes on AI that have come out, and they all reinforce the original data that I saw. And that data showed that attitudes and trust in AI globally, in the US, in the UK, in the rest of the Western world, are in the low 30s percentile. And in China and the rest of the developing world, high 70s. That is a massive difference. That is really kind of shocking when you're talking about global attitudes on anything, to see a gap that's that big and that pronounced, and that divided by Western versus developing world. And there are a lot of reasons why that may be the case. And we can get into some of those during the discussion, although I am no expert on all of global attitudes on AI. But here's one thing I do know. We could end up winning the race to AGI on the technology. We could end up getting to AGI, however we want to define that, faster than China does. But if we can't develop an environment where we have more trust in what this technology can do for people, we will lose the race on adoption. Adoption matters in this space. And I think that one of the things I've seen in the United States is we have really, I think, scared the bejesus out of people about what this technology is going to mean for them. We've made people afraid to use it in their workplaces, certainly afraid to use it with government data. And when I think about that sometimes, I think it is absolutely true that we should be worried about risk. The answer isn't we shouldn't worry about risk at all. And I don't want to be misheard as making that argument. But I probably spend 80 to 85% of my time talking to the US government and governments around the world about AI risk, and maybe 10 to 15% talking about adoption. And everywhere else in the world that I go that's not the West, it's the inverse of that. I don't know what the right balance is, and I don't pretend to speak for the world's governments on what the right mix should be of risk versus adoption and how we should be thinking about it. But I would argue that that doesn't feel like the right balance. And we're going to have to accept a little bit of risk in exchange for some of the reward of what this technology can bring to us. And it's going to be incumbent upon policymakers and people in roles like the ones you have been in before and probably will be in after this to figure out exactly where we draw those lines. And that sounds like a really good place to start, and we can turn it over to a discussion. Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much, Katrina. That was just such a tour de force of so many issues. I know that everyone will have lots of questions that we want to get into. I think Roxana and I will just take a couple of the first, and then we'll open it up to the broader audience. But I wanted to touch on something that you've said before. So you've called this a historic turning point, the first time that a capability of such strategic and national security importance is developed almost exclusively by the private sector. We're in a school of government, and many of us have worked in government before, including yourself. So I wonder if you can expand a little bit more on what power governments really have to shape this future in this environment. Like, how can we actually build effective public-private partnerships? What incentives or leverage or things that can government offer to kind of shape this AI-driven future that actually will work?
So that's been changing, I feel like. A year ago, I would have given you a really different answer than the one that I'll give today, which is just kind of a byproduct of the fact that the incentives are shifting in real time. One thing to note is just how big the level of investment is that's going into this technology, and it's so much bigger than what any individual government can contend with. I mean, when I think about the U.S. government's, CHIPS Act, which was probably the most money that the U.S. government is going to put into this technology, it was $56 billion. It was 10% of what just my company alone announced in investment just a few months after that act was passed. And if you look globally, I mean, the numbers are just truly staggering in terms of how much private investment is flowing into this technology. And so what that means is that money is not a particularly big incentive that governments have to offer in this space. There is legitimacy, though. And, there is a certain type of legitimacy that comes from government involvement in a thing, government participation, government has like an imprimatur of legitimacy that it can give, and I do think that countries shouldn't discount the importance of that, but I also think that the thing that the policy community, the global policy community, has to bring to bear that everyone's undervaluing right now is ideas. Like we are this weirdly small company for as large as we are in the zeitgeist. OpenAI is about 3,500 people, but that includes, if you look at the top 10 most visited websites in the world, we're number 5. Of the top 10, every other company in the top 10 is between 70,000 and 200,000 people, and we're 3,500. And that includes like all the people who are working on safety. It includes all the people who are working on data center production. It includes like every single facet of what we do. So we are really small. And one of the things that I feel proud of about working at OpenAI is that despite, this is gonna sound like a contradiction, despite how much hubris we have about the technology, and we do have a lot of hubris about the technology and like where it's going, we have a lot of humility about our ability alone to get it right. And I don't think that this technology is something that one company alone or even one industry alone should be figuring out what to do with no government involvement and no government intervention. My CEO has said the same. CEOs of other companies have said the same. It's a very unusual moment in that you have a bit of an agreement amongst at least some of the key leaders who are driving this technology that like we need the world to pay attention in the policy community to come up with ideas for how exactly we proceed in this era. And we can't do both at the same time. We have something to contribute, but our primary focus right now is the technological enhancement and actually figuring out the next stages of what this technology can do. We can be useful in helping to figure out how to regulate it. We've certainly tried. We've offered policy blueprints. We have released our model spec. We disclose the ways that our technology is being misused and abused by state and non-state actors. We do things that it's easy to forget were unthinkable, when the social media companies were coming up. They didn't do those things the way that we're doing them. So there's a lot of goodness there. But I don't think long-term relying on individual companies to make like super wise decisions around all of this stuff is a long-term answer. We need the world's policy community to put their minds into it and to really understand the incentives. The last thing I'll say about that is, one of the big incentives that I don't see people leaning into enough is actually regulatory permitting. Mm-hmm. The energy permitting that's going to be required for global builds of the type that are being contemplated by this investment are really going to stretch many countries' capacities and their regulatory environments. And so countries that are willing to figure out new and alternative ways and to really just be open to a different way of thinking about what the regulatory environment should look like will, I think, have meaningful advantages in terms of getting data centers to be located and for the funding that's going to come with them to be located within their borders.
Yeah, that's so true. And so this is a follow-on question, but I love the point you made at the end about how we can win the race to AGI, but lose the race to adoption. And I think that's so often talked about in the context of competition with China or the open source versus closed source debate. But I'm interested in your views, looking at it from a little bit different perspective. Looking at it, we're here in the UK. Just last month, the US and UK signed this major tech prosperity deal. OpenAI is a big piece of working with KC and AC on developing standards for AI security, for example. So I'm wondering how you see that piece of it fitting in that allied cooperation to develop the kind of rules of the road, and what role the private sector has in facilitating that, particularly in a US-UK context.
My personal view, but I think this view is probably shared by many in my company, is that no one country should dominate on this technology, and I think we are biased in favor of multilateral arrangements, even though those are hard. That's going to be hard in any environment. It's going to be especially hard in the current environment, but it's really important because our mission is to benefit all of humanity with the technology, not just the West, not just the US, and I will say that I have a conviction that we don't get there without democracies continuing to lead on this technology. I believe that democracies continuing to lead on this technology is a necessary precondition to achieving that mission. But it can't just be one country.
Yeah, and then even in the UK, we've seen, as soon as that deal was signed, a lot of concern about UK tech sovereignty and are they losing that to American companies? It's a theme that comes up again and again, even among close allies. So I think it's difficult. It's a difficult problem when American companies have the most advanced technology, and we want to work with allies to do that, but it's not easy.
Keeping us, there really are only, depending how you count it, there are 3 Western companies that are actually actually at the leading edge on this technology. Everybody else is playing a bit of catch up, and then obviously there's DeepSeek and probably a couple of other Chinese model developers that are getting within spitting distance. But it is for what it's worth, the U.S. government, the national labs, and the NSA previously were of the mind that they might be able to develop models themselves. They have since, I think, abandoned that as something that's just not going to be a place where they can compete. And so what I think it means, going back to the point that you made earlier, I often say that one of the big challenges the U.S. government and other governments have right now with understanding the significance of this moment is that every other moment, certainly in American history, that we've had a technology of this consequence be introduced, whether it was electricity, whether it was the internet, the Human Genome Project, nuclear fusion, the U.S. government and the DoD in particular, the Department of Defense, they were stakeholders in the development of that technology to some degree, and they have no role in its development right now. And I can tell you from my perspective, having lived and worked in the U.S. government, it's very uncomfortable for the government right now to be in that position. They don't really know what to do about it. So I think for the first couple of years, they were like, maybe this will go away. And then, the toothpaste is not going back in the tube. And so now I really feel like there's more of a sense of, okay, we're gonna have to figure out how to partner. But what partnership looks like and what the incentives are very different here. Because OpenAI and companies like mine, we don't need the US government's money to be profitable. We need the US, we need governments around the world. So I don't want to be heard as saying we don't need governments from a policy perspective, but we don't need revenue from them to be successful, and that's a really hard thing for the US government to wrap its head around.
Yeah, and in this kind of historic moment that you've outlined, it's worth thinking through whether previous models from cybersecurity or social media companies for those types of partnerships, whether they still are fit for purpose with the technology we have today. You've talked about rapid advances in AI and the difficulty of keeping up with that. I wonder, drilling down specifically from a national security perspective, if you can talk a little bit about what keeps you up at night, not just in terms of the threats and risks and opportunities that we're facing today, but what's ahead in the future. So, for example, highly autonomous AI agents and the future of national security. Are there unique guardrails that we need to be thinking about now, to put in place now for the era of agentic AI? Or are there other things that you think policymakers and the private sector and public sectors are not focusing on, and that's what's coming next?
So, I mean, there's three areas that I'm the most concerned about, but I actually think that the sort of frameworks that we have right now are holding okay in those areas. One is mass surveillance enabled by AI. One is removing humans from the loop in critical decision making. And one is AI-powered weapons development. Offensive weapons development, defensive weapons, different scenario. Hopefully it brings some folks comfort. I have a lot of insight into what people are doing and not doing with this. I'm not seeing really concerning things happening, or even, I'm more concerned about how slowly adoption is going than I am that we're going straight into like autonomous killer robots. What I do worry about is a couple of things. One, where I see this all going is eventually, governments are going to need models to be exquisitely good at tasks that there's no commercial application for. And that's going to look like models that are trained on government data. That's not happening today with our company. I could see it happening in the future in very circumspect, very bespoke situations, and subject to a lot of governance. But I don't know that China isn't doing that today. There is a lot fewer barriers to public-private cooperation there, a lot more ability to access and train on government data, and that worries me a little bit because there's just some things that it's actually probably good that the models aren't that great at yet, and that they shouldn't be all that great at yet. We believe at OpenAI in the policy of iterative deployment. We decided a long time ago, and we continue to decide over and over, that we're not going to just build this technology in secret and make it really good and then unleash it upon the world. We're going to release it at various iterations, even when we know it's not that good yet, and let people come along for the ride of experiencing it. And you see that playing out in the way that we release things. We sometimes get it wrong. If you follow my CEO on Twitter, now X, you'll see there are lots of examples where we release a thing and then figure out, that didn't go the way that we wanted, or people were way more attached to that model or that behavior than we thought they were. And we go back and we iterate, and that iterative deployment is the point. It's not a mistake. It's what we have a conviction is the best way to introduce this technology to society and give society a chance to really figure out how it wants to organize itself in response. But, I guess the thing that I worry about, in addition to kind of what I said earlier about training models on government data, is actually Rails-free models. So, these models are born naked as a baby. They will not refuse anything you ask them to do. If you ask them to insert a cyber vulnerability inside your network, it will totally try to help you do that. And we spend a lot of time and effort, training our models and putting guardrails on our models. This also fits into the open versus closed debate. We released an open source model. We delayed the release of that model because we thought it was too capable in some areas that we weren't comfortable releasing into the world. And like I said, once that genie is out of the bottle, there's no getting it back. So we really spent a lot of time getting that right. I worry that other competitors may not be taking some of that stuff as seriously, and maybe releasing into the world things that we're not really ready for. And I think that has a consequence for governments and policymakers. I really think that governments and national security agencies within governments really need to understand what Rails-free models look like, so that they can understand get a more accurate and complete understanding of the risk surface area that they represent. Because right now, most of your countries, my country, they don't have access to Rails-free models. They aren't able to see what they could do if without any constraints. And that is something that keeps me up at night.
That's fascinating. I think you and I have been in a lot of the same national security rooms, and there is this kind of like sense of inevitability that the West, that democracies have to develop these offensive AI-powered weapons. They have to develop these technologies, because if they don't, others will, and that's a problem. But I think the point that you made earlier, that it's not just the technology itself, but the ecosystems we put around it, the institutions that we put around it, that's where there's this huge kind of competitive and moral advantage, where the most immediate threat is not the AI apocalypse where killer robots take over the world, but it's the ways in which humans are leveraging this technology to enact new forms of domination and oppression over each other. And so what does that get to? What's the solution to that? It's the ecosystem, the institutions that surround it.
You just reminded me of something that I think is really important, and I wish I had said it earlier. Hopefully if I say it really effusively, it'll stick with you guys. One of the things that I deeply believe is that the benefits of AI need to accrue to the non-military instruments of national power, just as they do to the military ones. And I don't see enough happening there. Mm-hmm. And it's something that in my company, we developed our own kind of national security values and principles internally to the company. It was a process that I led. It was very inclusive with our workforce. And one of our principles is that we understand that military as an instrument of national power, particularly in the US, has the deepest pockets. It's the place where if you're trying to sell something, it's the easiest to sell. We have decided as a company that we are going to proactively try to ensure that the non-military instruments of national power benefit from this technology just as well. And that's going to involve us having to work for it. It's not going to be as lucrative. That is an easy commitment for us to make, because civilian protection, human rights, diplomacy and statecraft, like those are all areas that can benefit tremendously from this technology, but they're going to need, I think, a little bit more help and a little bit more intentionality from companies like mine to be able to be at the leading edge and to do it as quickly as the military instruments of national power will.
Oh, absolutely, it's an important point. I want to bring Roxana into this conversation.
Sure, and I'm happy we're in the governance sphere here, because my domain is not so much national security, but governance. So I guess I have two different questions, and one is going to tie in with the question that came in online. So one is around the international cooperation side of things. What can be done outside national borders, and where do you see that cooperation going? And then the second one, I guess, speaking on your point about under 30s using ChatGPT as an operating system and seeing all these changes that the technology has brought, we are experiencing a re-platformization of society in a way. What does that do to our institutions, right? There's a need to rethink them, but do we need to create new institutions? Are we fine with what we have currently?
Or lost.
I don't know that anyone feels like their institutions are holding up particularly well at the current moment.
For so many different reasons.
Which has nothing to do with AI.
It's not always about AI.
I'm not sure. Do I think we need new institutions? Probably. Do I have any idea what those institutions should look like? I mean, I do think we need a different form of public-private partnership than we've ever had in the past. It probably needs to be multinational. It probably needs to be with more than one company and not just, one-on-one. How we do that, I don't know. But I often think about it in my mind as like a pyramid where there's some stuff at the very top that is so sensitive that we keep it inside secure, government. In my mind, I always go to Five Eyes because that's what I know. But it's some constellation. I think that constellation has to include APAC. It can't just be So it's something like that, and there's like a tippy top where really elite capabilities can be developed inside of a secure environment, and then everything else becomes like the okay for commercial kind of layer. How you get there, the diplomacy, the statecraft, the incentives, like, I mean, one of you needs to figure that out because that isn't going to be easy. Right, but do I think that our current set of institutions is fine or up to the task of this moment? Probably not. But that's a really easy thing to say and a really hard thing to do. And then your other question about sort of international cooperation. I mean, look, everybody's countries have agency in this moment. The biggest lever they have is land, energy, and power. There is no one country, including as much as my country might want it to be, the United States, that has enough land, power, and energy to actually meet what this moment is going to require. So every country and every administration is going to have some ability to sort of say, hey, what about me? Come over here. And not just to my company, but to other companies as well. And eventually you're going to have a pretty global ecosystem that will, we will have to create new norms around it. It's not going to be the same set of players that we've seen cooperate in the past. It's going to be a different set of players. But that creates massive opportunity diplomatically to bring new people into orbits that used to maybe sit outside of them, to create new incentives to drive behaviors that internationally are advantageous and desirable. And I don't currently see the level of ambition for that I would like to be seeing. And I wish I could say I could do that thinking myself. I have a full-time job, and I cannot do that myself. But we want to be part of the conversation. We have a role to play in that conversation. We just can't be the only ones leading it.
Mm-hmm. And just a question that came in online from Blessing Ajimotti was around the role that developing countries can play, considering that they have disproportionately smaller access to frontier models and compute.
I mean, number one, use the technology. The technology is wildly level setting. It allows people to play on a field that with fewer resources that what previously was inconceivable. I think about this, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, so don't hold me to it, but I think in the last 48 hours, OpenAI has announced 80 plus countries that we're going to roll out ChatGPT, what do we call it? ChatGPT Go, which is basically a product that allows you to access ChatGPT at a paid level that is much more accessible to the developing world. So it's not the $20 that you're getting in the U.S. It's something much lower than that, and it's I think differs depending on region. But that democratization of access, the fact that we have as much available in the free tier of OpenAI, of ChatGPT as we do, is remarkable. But even we're lowering the barriers in every possible place we can to make developing countries able to access this technology at the same time as their Western peers. You've not really seen that before. One of the things that I loved that we did is we realized this was over a year and a half ago now. This is fairly quick, near soon to when I joined OpenAI. We realized that a huge part of the developing world doesn't have smartphones. They're not using the internet. They don't have access to it where they are. So that's a pretty big limiting factor. So we created 1-800-ChatGPT, and you can call for free from wherever you are and ask questions orally over the phone. And most people have access to a phone, even if there at least a larger proportion of the developing world has access to phones than have access to regular and reliable internet. And so that was an innovation that I thought to myself, that is exactly the kind of thing that we should be doing. And I was really proud that we did. But I continue to think that the single biggest thing that we're doing to democratize access is making it available everywhere for free to whoever can use it. I'm also frankly really proud that it's not an ad platform. You can quibble about it costing anything at all, but one of the choices we continue to wrestle with, and I don't know where it'll end. At some point, don't hold me to it. There could be ads on ChatGPT. Who knows? But there aren't currently any plans to, and part of that is a really radical departure from what we've seen in other moments. I don't want to live in a world where consumption of tokens is the measure of success, because that incentivizes companies to create addictive technology. It's not. We've seen where that leads us, and I mean, I am addicted to my phone, but I'm not addicted to ChatGPT, and I don't want to live in a world where that's the incentive that these companies are striving for.
Wonderful. We have lots of questions coming in online, but I think we should give the people in the room an opportunity to ask questions first, and then we'll collect some of the online questions. We can do 3 at a time to fit in as many as possible. Could you please introduce yourself when you start? We'll start from this side. I think we'll take.
Yes. Hi, I'm studying Master's in Diplomatic Studies, so thank you for all that you shared. Wanted to acknowledge and applaud that it's an all-female panel onto very majority leading non-female topics. So I was curious on your thoughts on how gender inclusion is going with the AI adoption and what you think is needed to continue success potentially in that space.
Thank you very much. We'll go to your colleague in front. Thank you.
Hi, I work in the Pandemic Sciences Institute. So your guardrails are extensive, but they're not 100% perfect. So what is OpenAI going to do the first time there's a major terrorist attack that kills many people, where evidence emerges that AI has enabled the attack by weapon development or some other aspect? And perhaps you could explain what OpenAI would do if your tool was used versus that of other AI companies.
Mm-hmm. Could we go at the back, please? Thank you.
I see these are all going to be very easy questions.
Hi, Jamie. I'm currently doing a part-time master's in data science and AI, and I've just left the British Army. But one of your concerns also keeps me up at night as well, which is about autonomous weaponry. What happens if an adversary starts using them and we are put in a position where we must compete, but the appetite for the hue in the loop isn't quite the same? And I think every British Army officer's biggest concern is making a decision which is illegal, which then leads to a loss of life. Is there a capability which AI can be used where it doesn't have to be autonomous, but it can also compete with autonomous weaponry, if that makes sense?
Whew, okay.
Sorry, it's really
difficult.
difficult.
No, it's hard. I mean,
yeah.
These are excellent and important questions, and my first response to all of them is, oh my God, you should all be part of this problem solving. When it comes to gender, look, it's very male dominated in the tech industry. It was very male dominated when I was in the United States Army. It was very male dominated when I was in the special operations community, so I'm kind of used to it. I would say that one of the things that I love at OpenAI in particular is like our whole national security team is all women. I don't know how that happened, but it is. We now have like one guy, and he's like always a little out of place in what's happening. How do we keep it inclusive? I mean, STEM. Like women, need to get into the business of coding and learning this tech and learning technological things. And I mean, that's been the truth for a long time, but like, I sometimes think about like, what if I could go back? What would I do differently in terms of my own education and the things that I chose to pursue? Because I see people who are making different choices, and that's why they're ending up in some of these rooms. When it comes to like so look, I often say inside my company privately that one of the things that I am trying to do in my job, and that I believe is my job to do, is to create urgency and momentum around this technology in the absence of an emergency. And unfortunately, my government and governments around the world actually do their best work and their most innovative work in the wake of something terrible happening. I've spent a lot of time going and sort of, sounding the alarm a little, you got to do this in the right way because you don't want to scare the bejesus out of everybody, but you also want them to understand, like, hey, this is an important moment. I remember going to see basically all of the deputies level officials in the U.S., like at very senior levels, when we had the reasoning breakthrough. And we knew it was really significant. We knew it was going to be game-changing, and we knew it was going to level up. It was going to take us from, what was then, a chat product that was able to like pass the bar to being able to like exceed human PhD performance. We knew we were on that pathway, and we felt like, okay, we need to go and tell the government that. And it was really, the foundations really weren't there. Like, people at very senior levels of government are just not fluent enough in what's happening with the technology, so you really have to kind of like spend a lot of time, and turns out they don't have a lot of time to spend on something that isn't on fire. But we kind of got them there, and we showed some demos, and we helped them sort of understand that this was a big deal. And then what happened? That was in September. In November, we had a presidential election in my country. And the whole thing, we just lost like 6 months, because then you got to get a whole new set of people in place, and then they've got to get confirmed. And, there's just like there's just a process that happens in our country. And that's not dissimilar to what happens in other countries as well. Like, that is just, the timing is a little inconvenient. And so what do you do about that? One, you keep trying. Two, I'm proud to say, even though this is kind of a statement against interest, because like I, in theory, am supposed to be the person trying to convince, democratic governments they should be using AI for defense and intelligence purposes. Our models refuse more than anybody else's models refuse. Like, there are benchmarks for this sort of thing. And our models are really kind of almost over-tuned to not do things that we don't want them to do. So in some ways, it is actually statistically more likely, depending on how you count this, that if something bad happens, it's going to be using an open source model or some other model that's been tuned to, not refuse whatever it is that the bad actor is trying to do. I don't think that really matters, though. Like, when I think about, would I want it to be our model? No. Would I be super relieved if it was like DeepSeek and not ours? No, because either way, like a bad, if any of this technology can lead to those results, we all have a responsibility to be part of solving for that, and we all have a responsibility to be part of defending against that. When it comes to autonomous weapons and how I think about that, look, I wrestle with this all the time, and I don't pretend that I have all the answers to it. I don't want the U.S. or our allies fighting with one hand tied behind their back. But I also don't want the U.S. or our allies relying on technology that isn't reliably and defensively able to do what we're using it for. And the way that I think about our policy approach is along two dimensions. So this is a little three-dimensional, but I think this will help give you a framework, the framework that I use. When I think about a defense or intelligence use of this technology, I think about what are the stakes? That's kind of my y-axis. Is it gonna make someone's HR process more efficient? That's like low end. Is someone gonna die, right? And everything in between. But there's this other dimension that's really important too, which is how is fit for purpose? Like, how reliably today can this technology do the thing that we're talking about using it for? And, on one side of that spectrum is like translation, data analysis, summarization, drafting emails. And then on the other end of that spectrum is like, autonomous deployment in theaters of conflict. And we don't have data, we don't have metrics yet. We haven't done the work there. And so when I think about low stakes, technology is really good at using it. That's where I green light it, like I'm super comfortable there. When I think of super high stakes, technology is not ready for it yet. That's like a no for me. And for me, I mean for my company. And then, where I spend most of my time is in the yellows. And that's where we've built a ton of governance. We have a lot of, I won't bore you with all the different pieces of it, but we have a lot of governance around everything that falls into yellow. We call it L2 internally. And the yellows are where we try to really get it right. But one of the things I'm also mindful of is that that's my company's framework. There's no government requirement that we apply that framework. And there's no requirement that other companies apply a similar framework. And so the question then becomes like, how do you think about that when you're in the army or you're tasked with keeping people safe and you don't yourself want to be a victim? And the answer there is that we have a limited partnership with Anduril, which is a company in the U.S. that does manufacture weapons. It is for a purely defensive air defense system. And one of the reasons that we agreed to do that partnership is because we really wanted to understand in a purely defensive context. They have like some really amazing ability to do test and evaluation that we really were attracted to being able to work with them on. And we really wanted to test the assumption, could we buy more time for operators to make decisions? Could we fuse the data in such a way that it actually allows the operator to have a minute instead of 10 seconds? And the theory is just, you make better decisions if you have more time. And so that, it was still early. I can't report on results of it yet, but our conviction is that like there is a universe in which we don't go into, autonomous, lethal, operational contexts. I don't want to be there. I won't allow our technology to be used in that way. Nobody in my company will. But I do worry about the ethos and ethics and restrictions that others are placing. Thankfully, I'm not seeing anything right now that suggests that this is an area that we need to be particularly concerned about yet.
So two connected questions that came in online. One is around AGI to be expected in this kind of conversation. So where do you see that going there? There's a variation on that question, but I think the question is how realistically far or close are we to that? And then the second one is on the US-China competition and whether there is any risk that the US loses in the long term, and where does that put all of us? I guess these two would...
Okay, AGI. We used to think that we would go to bed one day and there would be no AGI, and we would wake up the next day and there would be AGI, and nobody really thinks about it that way anymore. The way we think about it now is more in terms of like levels, like level changes. And we've done some thinking internally. We haven't published on it, but I will share with you that, the first, we think that there will be 5 levels. And we don't even really call it AGI anymore, although we keep saying that and then everybody still calls it AGI, so I don't know that. But, level 1 was really the chat era. Level 2 was reasoning. Level 3, we're just starting to get to now, and that's agentic systems that can take actions in the real world and reliably, perform those tasks in the real world. I would say we're at the beginning of scratching the surface there. I have a agentic system that that's integrated with ChatGPT that like scans my email every morning before I wake up and reads all my sent mail and then tells me, here's all the emails that you haven't responded to in the last day, which is like really important because I get 150 or more emails a day and I like cannot keep on top of it. And so it really does like turbocharge. So when you start seeing the like assistant, the like really powerful assistant function, or like my ChatGPT is integrated with my calendar, so I can be like, I need to have a meeting with these 5 people. When are we all available? And it, instead of like going into the calendar and trying to look at it all, it just tells me, you guys are all available Friday at 2. And it does it across time zones. It's very amazing. So you start to see the beginning of agentic workflows, and I think that's going to be a real explosion in 2026. 4 and 5 are harder levels to both define and to anticipate when we're going to get there. Level 4 is a system, an AI system that's capable of taking actions and performing the functions of an entire organization that creates net new discovery in the world, like things that humans could do if they had all the time in the world, but haven't yet done for whatever reason. And level 5 is like net new discoveries in the world that humans, haven't done and probably couldn't do. and it's more organizational. So like level 5, we think of it as an AI that could, for example, design and implement and run an entire like metro transit system or something like that. When do we get there? I mean, I don't know. I definitely know, I can see a little bit in the future at OpenAI, like 6 to 12 months in the future. And you know, what is the models that are coming are going to be, these next ones are going to be the first ones that really like exceed human capabilities. Right now we're exceeding them, but only by a little bit. And so it's not as shocking. But like, you know, the national labs, which is, I mentioned a project that I led, the head of AI at the national labs did a study with 25 PhDs where they tried to quantify like how useful is the reasoning model to our reasoning tasks, and they measured it. And their assessment was that for certain types of reasoning tasks, not all of them are, it's not equally valuable for all types of reasoning, as you can imagine if you're a scientist. But for the ones that it's really good at, they assess that it's worth 30 minutes with our then O1 model, which is already deprecated, was worth 3 to 6 months of a human PhD, which is really a wild statistic if you think about it. And so, you know, this next round of models that'll come out in early 2026, I think will be really sort of stunning to see what they're capable of. Will it be AGI? I mean, my answer is AGI seems to be best defined as whatever the current models can't do already. I think many of us would say if we had back in 2022 been given access to the current reasoning models, we probably would have been like, that is 100% AGI, you know what I mean? But I think it's the goalposts keep moving as we get more capable models.
Right, thank you. Let's take another round of questions. We'll start on this side. Yeah, we can go to the back and then move the mic in front. I think that would be the easiest. And please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for your talk. I'm a current MBA at Oxford, but my background's in AI implementation for the government of Hong Kong. So I've kind of seen both sides where I've interacted with the Chinese models as well as all the models from the West.
I want to hear you give a talk.
My question kind of builds on the gender inequality aspect, especially now with agentic workflows coming in, where we're not overseeing what these models are really doing and let it go ahead with whatever task we are assigning it. How can we make sure that these models are not biased, especially when it comes to demographic features such as nationality, gender, age, and so on?
Well, I'll tell you a bad story and then a good one. The first time I was using what was then called DALL-E. It was our text-to-image generation software. This was like a year and a half ago now. I was getting ready to go on this Egyptian vacation that I've been looking forward to for a really long time. I took my daughter. It was just like so great. And if you haven't gone to Egypt, you should totally go. It's like so amazing. And also you should take ChatGPT with you because, oh my God, all I did was like scan hieroglyphics and then it would be like telling me all these things that were, it like knows where you are. It can like figure out what temple you're in based on that. It's wild. Anyway, and that was a year and a half ago. But I wanted to put this very cool out of office in my, like, out of office, so you got a reply from me that said, hey, I'm in Egypt. And I wanted it to have like a picture of me, like sort of the back of me, like looking at the pyramids or whatever. And so I kept trying to describe myself, and like I'm in my 40s, I'm like kind of an old lady, and it kept turning me into this like voluptuous, like, you know, like inappropriate, like something I don't want to put in my work email. And, you know, and I was like, why is it doing this? I kept being like, I'm not that thin. And it kept doing it. And I realized it's because really like scantily clad women are of a certain look are way overrepresented in the data, right? That's why it's doing that. And so I fired off like a nasty Slack message to the training team, and I was like, this is so annoying, you know? And I will say, it has gotten a lot better. Like, if you tried to do that same thing today, it would be, we have counteracted some, but not all of that, in just getting better at what we do. But there's no question that bias in training data, as it is in life, you know, AI is not any different than the world that we've created of the documentary record of our world that we live in, and that record is very biased, and so are these tools. And so the question is, what do you do about it, right? You can ignore it. That's not a good solution. You can ban it. I would argue that's not good either. Or you can study it and figure it out. So we released less than 7 days ago. It may have even been, I think it was maybe on Friday or Thursday of last week. Our first real study of the bias of our models. And I would commend to you to take a look at it if you haven't already. It concludes that our models are biased, but that our most recent one is the least biased of the ones that we've released to date. But the more important thing is actually just the methodology. It's that we're trying to actually develop methodologies to study that sort of thing, and then when you can figure out how to study it and measure it, you can figure out how to remediate it. And so, what we're gonna need is more of that. Do I think this is the solution? No. I think it's a very important first step, and I'm glad that we've taken it. The other thing that we're doing in OpenAI is we're really trying to make models respond to you in the way that you want to be responded to, and to not treat everyone in exactly the same way, and allow you to sort of opt into. Some of us, and I'm probably in this category, prefer a model who's like a little more academic and like not trying to be my friend. I don't want that. I got enough friends. Some people really want warmth from the model, and they want emojis, and they want like this different sort of banter. And people should be able to pick within as long as their choices are not hurting other people, they should be able to pick some of that for themselves. And that includes, that I think can be a way of helping mitigate against bias in some contexts. What we have to worry about, what I worry about, is that people will choose personas that reinforce their existing beliefs. How exactly you mitigate against that, that's a tougher nut to crack.
Excellent. I know we promised microphone there in front, and we're going to go to that.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think we can take maybe the three questions together and then come over here. Yeah. That would be great. And in between, I'm going to try to tag in this question from the online participants, because it's related. So somebody refers to the release of Sora too, and the deepfake concerns. And the question is, can you talk a bit more about the idea that companies can put out whatever technology they want into the world, and society has to adapt, versus companies needing to consider and be responsible for harms as part of their social license to operate?
Okay.
We can.
Hello. Thank you very much for an insightful lecture. My name is Juliana. I have a PhD in education. And so I'm interested in the project you mentioned when AI outperformed multiple PhD candidates or PhD holders. So my question for you is, in what way do you think our education systems will have to change to accommodate this technology? Because one could make an argument that education is a matter of national security. So how do we ensure that the future generations are equipped with the skills to handle this technology? Thank you.
Great question.
Hi, once again, thank you very much for your insightful sharing. I'm Justin. I'm doing history and also in the strategic studies group. I wanted to ask, I think AI models, for those who use it a lot, it can be worldview shaping. And I think it's kind of tagged on to the bias question, in that how are AI companies dealing with ideological biases of their models? What is the risk of it swaying political and ideological views? And can it be weaponized by foreign actors? Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so education, political bias. That one was
society having to adapt.
Oh, society having to adapt. Okay, and then we got one more, right?
Ma'am, my name is Fahad. I'm an MPP student. My question is about particularly leadership, right? You've worked for a lot of public sector leaders, people who always are accountable to someone, usually POTUS at those high levels. Now in the private sector, who and I guess in this space, where does the accountability lie? And we've mentioned that obviously we want it for the human race and kind of acceleration of science as a whole, but inevitably there will be connective tissue in one place more so than the other. So more about, I guess, so accountability.
Yeah, so I'll start there, and because this question kind of weaves through some of the others. I have to think about how to answer this on the record. Look, I don't know that it is inherently a good thing that companies can become this powerful, that like they have 84% market share on a technology that like everyone is gonna need, like electricity, you know? But that is the world that we live in, right? Part of the accountability is, that I see, is to society as a whole. If we lose trust, trust is everything that we have at OpenAI. If we lose the trust of the people who use our technology, they will leave and go use someone else's. Nobody is compelling them to use our technology. It's very easy to switch. The barriers are low today. I don't know that that will always be true. Once you've developed AIs that really know you and have learned you know, your likes and dislikes and knows all your data and is connected to all your stuff, that will be a harder bar. But like, trust is a really big thing with the people globally that we serve. And I think we think about that a lot in the company, because it's not a guarantee that people around the world are gonna trust an American developed technology, right? And there's good reasons for them to ask questions about that and kick the tires on that, right? But this also gets into what your colleague was asking about, like political bias. I mean, you know, we are living in unprecedented times. I do not have to tell you. One person's political bias is another person's perfectly reasonable opinion. And that is true both in domestic politics in any of our individual countries, but it's also true internationally too. And, you know, I think it's important. One of the things that I'm proud of that we did at OpenAI, you know, and I'm not, these are not all the answers, right? And I will say with a lot of humility, a lot of the choices that we've made as a company, it's actually not great that there are choices to make, right? Like one of those choices was that we published the first ever model spec. And if you haven't taken a look at a model spec before, you don't know what it is, I commend it to you as worth, you know, you can ask ChatGPT to summarize it for you if you'd like. But the model spec is a very lengthy and detailed articulation of how we trained our model to behave. And what we chose, what we told it to prioritize when trade-offs have to be made, how we told it to, you know, respond to things, like what, you know, what values it's infused in are detailed in tremendous, excruciating detail in the model spec. And we published it because our view was that it was awkward that we were the ones making those decisions. And we thought that the most responsible thing we could do was expose everyone to it and let the public get to have a say. And, you know, we certainly find that like groups of, you know, interested groups engage on this stuff. We have changed things about the model spec over time, as you would expect. But I would argue that in general, as a baseline, you should spend a minute looking at the model spec of any model that you're gonna use. And if it doesn't publish one, well, that's useful information too. Because you should have some awareness of what values have been infused into the models that you're using. And I think eventually organizations, independent organizations, will create mechanisms where they evaluate the models on different criteria that are neutral and that are designed to get at that. I would like more of that sort of thing to exist today. Right now we have like the Casey's and the safety institutes doing some of that, but maybe not across all the vectors that might matter to a user, right? So I think there's space for something like that to exist. You know, getting more to the question of like, should companies be able to just introduce something and just have the world have to react to it? I mean, I personally am conflicted about that. But I also am a realist, and you know, do I think that there's a way to say you're responsible for anything bad that happens with this technology? I mean, so you'll hear me talk a lot about electricity. I keep bringing that up, and it's because I don't know how many of you have studied the history of electricity. I had not until I started at OpenAI, but it is a fascinating history, and I'm gonna get probably some of the details wrong, so don't view this as authoritative, but you should look into this yourself. But when electricity was invented and then being being introduced into like residential environments and companies and, you know, sort of put into buildings, there was a huge outcry, both in the US and in other parts of the world, that it was just way too dangerous. People were gonna die, it was like super scary, and there was like an anti-electricity movement that emerged. And in fact, there's like, has some gruesome effects. Like at one point they electrocuted an elephant, and like to prove how like deadly the electricity was. And I mean, there's a lot of really weird stuff that went on. And the truth is, they weren't wrong. Electricity is super dangerous. And any one of us can go stick like a fork into a light socket and really injure ourselves or someone else. And but you know what we have done? We have figured out how to build security guardrails around it. We figured out with building codes and different types of materials, like we as a human society figured out how to make it more or less safe. It also was the underpinning of the nuclear bomb. And it's also the reason that if you have a child with pediatric brain cancer, they can get treatment. Both of those things are true. I think both of those things will be true about AI too. I think that some potentially really harmful things will come of it, and it's not possible to avoid those and also receive the benefits that will come from it, many of which we can't even fathom right now, because the ways that we use electricity today, nobody who was inventing it back, you know, at the turn of the century had any idea where it was gonna go. And it's been wildly amazing. I think most of us, if pressed, would say that the pros outweighed the cons, even though some of the cons were really, really bad. And, you know, I guess like to be a little bit more uplifting about all of this, you know, you don't spend 20 years in the national security world without being a little bit pessimistic about things and thinking a little bit dark sometimes. But the thing I've never been pessimistic about is actually like the general goodness of humanity. And I think that over time, with specific, you know, moments and groups aside, humanity generally like does a pretty good job of trying to get more of the good out of something than the bad. And, you know, I do think that I think that any one company or any one country is gonna figure this out by themselves? No. But do I think that like this many people thinking this hard about it in rooms like this all over the world can really make a difference? I do. Like, and I think that it will not surprise me if some of the people in this room, you know, come up with things that I never thought of.
That's excellent. I think we only have time for a very final round, so we'll have to be very selective. We promised the microphone here, but I also want to do justice to the room and turn to this side. So we'll try to take one question from there as well and one in the middle. So we'll start over here.
Thank you very much for this. Broderick McDonald, I work on the national security team at the Turing. My question is really around this US-China tech competition and the kind of Aschenbrenner thesis. If we are going to, you know, avoid this kind of race to AGI with China, we should be collaborating on certain things. But there's huge political barriers to that. So I wonder, do you have a partial answer perhaps of what areas we could start to focus on to build some initial collaboration, whether that be CBRN or AI-enabled terrorism, something that is, you know, depoliticized, but also a priority for both countries? Thank you.
Excellent. We'll try to take another question here in the middle. We'll go to one of the two girls here. Okay. And then we'll come to you.
Thank you. My name is Lorna, studying for Master of Public Policy at the Blavatnik School. 2 days ago, the CEO of OpenAI mentioned that OpenAI does not intend to act as the moral police of the world, suggesting that adult users should have significant freedom in how they interact with AI while maintaining safeguards for mental health. From a national security and policy perspective, AI systems increasingly influence behavior, social norms, and information flows across borders. How should governments and security institutions reconcile that tension while respecting corporate autonomy and protecting societal safety, particularly in areas like misinformation, psychological manipulation, and radicalization? In your view, where should the line be drawn between safeguarding citizens and overlapping into paternalistic regulation of AI?
A very easy one.
Very easy.
We had a number of questions
Hi.
online as well.
My name is Jocelyn. I'm a master's in social anthropology. And my question is, as AI technology proliferates, its capacities accelerate, can the bureaucratic processes of regulatory policy keep up? And how can it do that as AI it continues to accelerate?
So that's the no is the answer. Can it keep up? No, it has not. It has not kept up. It is not keeping up. I think it's how do you deal with that then is I think and this actually ties in with your question as well. I really believe iteration is going to be key. So like when you were sort of asking how do you draw the line, there is no line. There's no the line. We're going to draw a line. And then we're gonna redraw it, and then we're gonna redraw it as we learn more, as we get better. So like, what I really see a lot of people doing is being like paralyzed with inaction in the policy space. They're like, I don't understand this well enough. I don't know what to do. And so what they're doing is nothing rather than doing something and having it be bad or need to be corrected. And I think this is a space where there is something about this technology that makes everyone feel dumb. And I'll just say that, like, I feel dumb about this technology, and I literally work on it all day, every day. There's just something about it that makes you feel like there's so much going on and you can't keep up. And there's, humans have this kind of bias when that's happening to just, like, get in a defensive crouch. I think that is the wrong answer and the instinct that we should avoid against. Doing something and getting it wrong and then quickly iterating is a way better approach. Now, governments, especially regulatory environments, typically don't do that. Like, it tends to be the case that you get something through some sort of legislative process and then it sticks. And one of the reasons that companies like mine are so afraid and like pushing back on, certainly in my country, state level regulation instead of a federal approach is because we are afraid that that you, like the policy community, are going to like put something in place and then not iterate and not change it if it's bad and not learn if it's like going poorly. And if we can somehow figure out a way to agree jointly that we're all just gonna iterate, that would be so much better. And it would also just be smarter from like a public policy standpoint, because the idea that we're gonna like figure this all out on one given day and then we're gonna put a policy in place, that's just not, it's not consistent with how the technology is unfolding. It's not consistent with our experience. And so if we could actually trust each other that we could iterate on this together, I think that would be so much better. China.
In a word.
In a word. Where we could start, one place we do have agreement is not removing humans from the loop in key decision making. That is a good place. But look, I've become more pessimistic and not more optimistic over time about where this is all heading. The competitiveness, the way that competition is manifesting in this space does not make me feel super great about where things are going. But we've never gotten good outcomes from giving up on trying. And I think, I do think that we all benefit from establishing some norms that we just will not cross. And humans in the loop for nuclear decision making is super important. Bio is another big one. I would love to be able to agree on cyber. I don't know that that's like a ripe area for cooperation. But like, bio certainly feels like something that we should be able to get to yes on. But the other thing is that we have shared goals and we have a shared humanity and a shared planet. And those are all, there's far more that we agree on than that we disagree on. So, there will be fierce competition over the personalities of models, open source versus closed source, and what we do and don't do in military contexts. But I would like to live in a world where we could agree on some of the big stuff with them, no matter what.
I think we would all like to continue this conversation for several more hours, and the good news is that you can, because we have a drinks reception in Katrina's honor outside here. So please do take that opportunity to continue asking these tough, and you got a lot of easy questions tonight, Katrina.
I know. I'm like, ooh, I do need a drink.
Please do take that opportunity. But I just want to take a moment on behalf of everyone here to thank Katrina for sharing these deep insights with us today, and just to say I feel like for a session on national security that she's given us all a clear mission here, that we all have to go away and be more engaged in some deep problem solving on the range of issues we've discussed, whether it's PPPs, AI security, designing new institutional forms of governance, and this note of hope that she left us with, that despite all of these seemingly intractable problems, we should not underestimate the power of human creativity to solve them. So please join me in thanking Katrina for that, and join us for this.